Hello, welcome to the EMF Inspector. My name is Dr. Richard Cullen. Today we're going to be talking about deconstructing the experts once again, and in this case we're going to be talking about Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki and ABC's problem. Quick bit of background, who am I? My name is Dr. Richard Cullen. I have a degree in physics and a PhD in electrical engineering. I've worked for over 20 years in the IT and software development business. And what do I want to talk about specifically today? Well, Dr. Karl's been active recently, coming out with multiple pieces of news about 5G. 5G hysteria is coming, and also a Triple J podcast where he talks about 5G as well. We need to talk about this today and understand what Dr. Karl's telling us and whether or not it's correct. First of all, who is Dr. Karl? Karl Kruszelnicki is an Australian science communicator and populariser who's known as an author and a science commentator on Australian radio and television. If you live in Australia, everyone knows Dr. Karl. He is the man of science and everybody knows him. And Dr. Karl is a credentialed individual. He has a degree in physics, he has a master's degree in biomedical engineering, and he has a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgery. He's a fully qualified and experienced doctor as well as a scientist. He's all over the media. As I say, if you know him, he's got books, TV, radio, podcasts, the works. Now, what is 5G hysteria? We should no longer assume that any current or future wireless technology, including 5G, is safe without adequate testing. A hysterical statement, right? Except this was made in March this year by Dr. Ronald Melnick, who was the lead designer of the NTP study of cell phone radiation. He is the man who was at the heart of the biggest mobile phone radiation study we've ever seen. It was a $25 million study done in the US. I'm not sure that you can say that the lead scientist in that study is hysterical if that's his position at the end of a multi-year study. But anyway, let's continue. Into part one of the show. Just give me a second while I pull up the sound, and here we go.
This is an ABC podcast.
This is the problem. Take a pair of scales of the old-fashioned type.
G'day, it's Dr Karl here. Now, like it or not, the 5G telephone network is coming. And it offers blisteringly fast download speeds, up to 1 gigabyte per second. That's almost as astonishing as the negative publicity around 5G telephone networks. It claims that vast numbers of people have already died from various cancers given to them by the evil 5G radiation, which apparently has also killed vast swathes of forest across the world.
Okay, I presume with the forest reference there, he's saying how some people have linked the South Korea fires with 5G rollout, or the Santa Rosa fires in California with the 5G switch on there. I'm not making any statements, but what I will point you to, especially that he doesn't actually back up any of this with anything that we can look to in terms of references to the information he's stating. But what we can look at is actual science, where we do see radio frequency radiation injures trees around mobile base stations. Okay, let's keep going.
That's amazingly fast acting, even for evil radiation, considering that by April 2019, the 5G phone networks had been deployed for only a few months in a handful of cities in South Korea, China and the USA. Now, all mobile phones, including 5G, use high-frequency radio waves.
Yes, they do.
That's a type of electromagnetic wave. So let me start with the electromagnetic spectrum. The bit that we're most familiar with is the visible light spectrum, which covers all of the colours of the rainbow from red to violet. It's just a tiny part of the spectrum sitting around the middle. We measure the frequency of electromagnetic waves in cycles per second, which is usually abbreviated to hertz. Down at the bottom end of the spectrum, we have the extremely low frequency band, or ELF. It runs from 3 to 30 hertz, or cycles per second. So in each second, these electromagnetic waves go up and down between 3 and 30 times. You can send information only each time the wave goes up and down. So the ELF band can send data only very slowly. But the ELF waves will penetrate the ground beneath our feet and even the oceans. So ELF frequencies were used to communicate with submarines while they were underwater. Heading up the spectrum, we run into the ultra-low frequency band, which runs from 300 to 3000 hertz. Because the frequency is higher, you can send more information in each second, but the waves don't penetrate as well. But they will still penetrate the ground, so they're used in underground mines. Then, as we get into the higher frequencies, we come across the million hertz or megahertz band,
Right there.
and that's used for AM radio, and the 100 million hertz or 100 megahertz band, which is used for FM radio and TV.
Yep.
Once again, we have the same deal. As the frequency gets higher, we can send more information in each second, but the signal is more easily blocked by solid stuff like the concrete in buildings.
Okay, let's just pause it here. So it said that the only way that you can transmit more data is by going up the frequency spectrum. Well, let's do a little fact checking on that, shall we? What we actually find is that with the same frequencies and improved technologies, you can send more data. In this case, we're looking at 4G, where by increases in technology, we can get more than 10 times the speed, so going from 100 megabits with LTE to 1000 megabits per second with true 4G, or in some cases up to 3 gigabits per second using LTE-A, and that's 4G technology, and that's the same set of frequencies that are being used. It's just that we're able to pump much more data through that with improvements in technology. So yeah, we're not quite on point there, Dr. Karl.
Our current 4G mobile phone networks run at frequencies between 700 megahertz and a few thousand megahertz, which is the same as a few gigahertz. Now the new 5G network uses two main bands, one under 6 gigahertz, that's 6 billion cycles per second, while the other one is above 24 gigahertz.
Yep, let's just have a look at that. So we're talking about low bands, mid bands, and high bands. We've used the low and into the mid bands with 3G, 2G, 3G and 4G, and 5G is possibly going to be able to use these high bands, but as we'll find out, and as if you've seen my other video, you already know there's physical limitations using high bands, and we'll have to see whether those actually get rolled out in time anyway.
So that's higher frequency than 4G, but it's still lower than visible light, which sits around 600,000 gigahertz.
What's your point? What's your point? It's not light, okay? It's electromagnetic radiation, and it has totally different characteristics to light, so I don't know why he keeps banging on about light.
So now it's time to re-emphasize 2 points. First, as the frequency gets higher, we get more cycles per second, so we can transmit more data. So it's just plain old physics that lets the 5G network transmit data to our phones at 1 gigabit a second.
Or 3 gigabit per second with existing 4G technology at the existing frequencies.
Second, as a frequency gets higher, the ability of the radio signal to pass through stuff gets less.
Yes, it does, and that's this diagram here where we can see the penetrative capabilities of 1 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz and 10 gigahertz radiation, and it drops off significantly the higher you go. So with 10 gigahertz radiation, we're talking 100 decibels, which is 1 with 0.1001 transmission at 100 decibels. It's infinitesimally small, so 10 gigahertz radiation really does get absorbed very strongly by passing through material.
Once again, plain old physics tells us that the 5G radio signal will be more easily blocked by the concrete in buildings than our current 3G or 4G phone.
Or glass, or skin, or clothes.
So what about the big cancer scare? Well, that all goes back to the fact that some electromagnetic radiation is able to damage atoms. To be more specific, the damage is that the atom gets some of its electrons knocked off. An atom that has lost electrons like that is called an ion, so this radiation is called ionising radiation. Ionising radiation is well known to cause cancer. In the electromagnetic spectrum, there's a very special barrier at the colour violet. It's the barrier between ionising radiation and non-ionising radiation, which means it's the barrier between cancer and non-cancer. Violet light will not damage atoms, but any radiation with a higher frequency can cause cancer.
Okay, there's a few problems with where Dr. Karl's going with this. Non-ionising radiation cannot cause cancer, and ionisation... non-ionising radiation cannot cause cancer. He's making the assumption that ionisation is the only mechanism by which cancer is caused. And, well, the science doesn't bear that out. So in a paper that I've quoted here, radiotherapy causes DNA damage directly by ionisation or indirectly via the generation of reactive oxygen species, thereby destroying cancer cells. Okay, so it's already in the scientific literature that non-ionising effects have biological impacts. And saying that ionisation is the only cause of cancer is really very far from the truth. In fact, what I did is I went to the IARC and looked at their class 1 carcinogens. These are known carcinogens, and I classified them into ionising and non-ionising. So in the total of 131 carcinogenic agents, we have 12 that are ionising and 119, or 91% of them, are non-ionising. So Dr. Karl banging on about ionisation as the cause of cancer, he's on a losing position on this one.
Ultraviolet light is the weakest ionising radiation. It has a slightly higher frequency than violet light at around 30 million gigahertz, and it does have enough energy to knock the electrons out of atoms. After all, we all know that ultraviolet light can cause skin cancers, which is why we put on sunblock. As we keep on going through the spectrum to higher and higher frequencies, we reach X-rays and finally gamma rays. These types of ionising radiation carry more energy, and if they land on human flesh, they can cause cancer. We know that both X-rays and gamma rays can cause cancer. But let's go back, away from cancer land, to that tiny part near the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the visible light band. As we travel in the other direction, from violet light to red and beyond, the frequencies get lower. This is all non-ionising radiation. It does not carry enough energy to damage atoms, so it cannot cause cancer.
You're wrong.
Visible light, AM and FM radio, TV, microwaves, mobile phones and power lines cannot cause cancer.
This is just factually incorrect. This is really problematic. So let's look at some of the proposed mechanisms by which non-ionising radiation may be pro-oncogenic, may cause cancer. Okay, so we've got 35 review studies demonstrating a correlation between radiofrequency radiation and cancer, and some of the mechanisms include oxidative stress and free radical damage with 19 review studies there, calcium channel stimulation with 15 review studies there, DNA damage with 21 review studies there, apoptosis with 13 review studies, endocrine effects 12 studies, we've got inflammation, we've got glucose metabolism, we've got heat shock protein formation. The link's right there, you can go and have a look in that. That's a large body of scientific evidence for non-ionizing mechanisms for the induction of cancer. So saying that ionization is the only effect that would cause cancer, well, that's just incorrect and that's misleading.
The frequency and energy is just too low to damage atoms. We have run many hundreds of studies over the last half-century, and we have never been able to prove that any of these non-ionizing radiations cause cancer.
Karl, you are fake news. You're just wrong, and you're dangerously wrong. The actual body of science, look at the ORSAA website, have a look at the database of collected scientific data there, and you can clearly see that your statements here are factually incorrect.
But hang on, you say? Wasn't there an oft-quoted study in 2018 that showed that mobile phone radiation caused cancer in both rats and mice? Actually, no. It showed that mobile phone radiation increased their life expectancy.
Karl, I can't believe the interpretation and the spin that you're putting on the study that was done, because that is not the conclusion that was produced. But I know we're going to get into that more in the second part of the show, so I'm going to hold my fire there until we get into it.
But I'll talk more about that next time.
Yeah, you and me both. Okay, let's get into the second part of the show. Part 2 of hysteria. Okay?
This is an ABC podcast.
This is the problem. Take a pair of scales of the old-fashioned type into one tail in the world.
G'day, Dr Karl here. Last time I talked about the upcoming evolution of the mobile phone network. The plan is to move from the current 3G and 4G networks to the much faster 5G network. And it's been accompanied by equally fast cancer scare publicity. But, as I said last time, while ionising radiation, such as ultraviolet and X-rays, can cause cancer, non-ionising radiation, which is the type of radiation put out by mobile phones and microwaves, does not. Despite hundreds of studies over the last 50 years, we have never proven that non-ionising radiation, like mobile phones use, causes cancer.
Let's just think about the wording he's using here. It's never been proven. Okay? It's never been proven. Could you go to a court of law and put down the proof of evidence? If we're assuming guilty until proven innocence, could you take the body of scientific evidence and go to court and prove beyond all reasonable doubt that radio frequency radiation causes cancer? I think that's the interpretation that Karl's going for here. Okay, but it's not really fair, because it took an awful long time before we got to the point where we could make that any claims to those effects, about asbestos and cigarette smoking. But we do have a large weight of evidence suggesting and strongly providing support for the theory that radio frequency radiation is linked to cancer and correlated with cancer and is pro-oncogenic. Again, we've provided links here where you can follow up if you want to see the body of evidence there, with 35 reviews showing cancer including initiation, promotion and progression, further including tumour progression, tissue invasion and metastasis. Okay, so there's a strong weight of evidence to support the hypothesis that radio frequency radiation is cancer inducing.
Or, as the US National Cancer Institute says, and I quote, "No consistent evidence for an association between any source of non-ionising radiation and cancer has been found," unquote. But what about the two major studies relating to non-ionising radiation
Let's just pause there and have a look at the Bioinitiative report in 2012. Meta-analyses of the Hardell group and interphone studies show an increased risk of glioma and acoustic neuroma. Supportive evidence comes also from anatomical localization of the tumour of the most exposed area of the brain, cumulative exposure in hours, and latency time that all add to the biological relevance of an increased risk. In addition, risk calculations based on estimated absorbed dose give strength to the findings. That was in 2012. This is the 2018-2019 study, the NTP, National Toxicology Program in the US, their cell phone study. In the heart of evidence for a carcinogenic effect can be based on 1. The presence of tumours in all 6 of the tested article groups versus none in the controls. We'll keep playing, but this is one of the pieces of evidence that Dr. Karl's using to say that there's a non-effect here. That's not the findings of the study.
And cancer that were released by the National Institutes of Health in the USA. The ones that are mentioned every time cancer and mobile phones comes up. One of the studies exposed rats to the electromagnetic radiation put out by mobile phones running at the relatively low frequency of 900 megahertz. Some 180 male and female rats were exposed to this radiation over their whole body, not just their heads. Now, the radiation levels were much higher than a human would get from their mobile phone.
That's true, but they are round about the safety limits for mobile phone radiation.
And the rats were exposed for 9 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 2 continuous years.
Okay, but the safety standards that exist in Australia and other parts of the world are set for that type of chronic exposure.
Surprisingly, the male rats that were exposed to the radiation actually lived longer.
Okay, you're really cherry-picking data here, because what we actually found was that there was a higher rate of natural death observed in that male group. Other effects included low birth weights
than the non-exposed rats. However, they did have more cancers of the heart and brain, but weirdly, only for the male rats.
Weirdly? As in, there's a biological difference between males and females. Maybe that's endocrine disruptive or related to the hormonal systems in those bodies. Or maybe it's genetic, because there's a difference between XX and XY chromosomes. In fact, if we look at the studies, yes, there are, both in male and female, and GSM and CDMA radio frequencies, there's significant differences between the two.
The other study exposed 180 male and female mice to another frequency used by mobile phones, 1900 megahertz. Again, they were exposed to very high levels of radiation for approximately 9 hours each day, 7 days per week, for 2 continuous years.
Chronic
and again,
exposure.
The male mice that were exposed to radiation lived longer than the control mice that were not exposed. And the male mice that were irradiated had higher levels of cancer, this time in the skin and lungs. But in this study, the female mice that were exposed to radiation did not get off scot-free. They had higher levels of malignant lymphomas. Now, wait a minute. That sounds like evidence that non-ionising radiation can cause cancer, right? Well, when you look at the actual statistics, the numbers of rats with cancer were all very low, all in the single digits. This is a very small sample size. And
it is a very small sample size. That is one of the problems here, that making strong statistical findings is very difficult given these results. And you see, what Dr. Karl's not telling us is that the intention of the study was not to conclusively prove cancer versus non-cancer. It was to establish a baseline, whether there was sufficient evidence to suggest the need and necessity for further research. It does. It achieves that goal quite conclusively. From the study author, the key findings are that cell phone radiation caused cancer and pre-neoplastic lesions in the heart and brain, DNA damage in brain cells of rats and mice, heart muscle disease, reduce birth weights, and the assumption that non-ionizing radiation cannot cause cancer or other health effects other than by tissue heating is wrong. Those are the actual conclusions of the study, Karl, not what you're trying to put your spin on.
That's a big problem. According to the neurologist, Dr. Stephen Novella, and I quote, "The fact that the data was negative in female rats, in male and female mice, and for most tumour types is important. It limits the applicability of the results, and it suggests they may be just random noise, or due to some confounding factor." Unquote. So,
Correct. More research is urgently required because we're seeing data that is indicative of real problems.
the results are still fuzzy. We need a bigger sample size. And on average, the radiation-exposed mice did live longer.
That's not what I saw in the data. But let's keep going. I'm also concerned that he's suggesting that we can't use rats and mice for research, that we need to use a more appropriately scaled thing, and that we need a broader range of test subjects. Is he suggesting that we need to experiment on the population in order to establish some safety criteria? That's a slippery slope.
However, this study is usually misquoted as showing that the radiation from mobile phones causes cancer in humans and reduces our life expectancy.
Okay, go and have a look at what the lead designer of the study actually says. Have a look at this YouTube video, the NTP cell phone study. It's a completely different take than what Dr. Karl's presenting.
But where is this fake news about mobile phones and 5G coming from? Surprisingly, according to the New York Times, a major source of disinformation about the 5G network has been the Russian TV network, simply called RT.
So the New York Times has never been involved with dissemination of false information. Well, there's actually a Wikipedia page all about that, and you can go and have a look for yourself. You can look at Project Mockingbird, which is a program to spread disinformation that's been active for years. But anyway, we're talking about RT here.
RT? Well, that stands for Russia Today, and it's available worldwide. RT claims that the 5G network is linked in humans to, and I quote, brain cancer, infertility, autism, heart tumours, and Alzheimer's disease, unquote.
Okay, so RT is maybe not your go-to source if you want conclusive factual information. It's claimed to be state-sponsored, a bit like the ABC maybe. That's a state-funded media organisation, isn't it, Dr. Karl? Interestingly, we're talking about bias in the media, and if you look at Dr. Karl's Wikipedia page, he says that his experience in the medical profession strongly influenced me to go into the media because I felt I could do more good there convincing people to vaccinate. So his motivation to enter the media was due to his ability to present a biased perspective on a scientific body, that he felt that he could have more influence on the public by going into media. So there's that.
There is zero scientific proof for this, especially considering that the 5G network has been running only in a very few locations and only since the beginning of 2019. The RT network consistently runs segments with titles such as "A Dangerous Experiment on Humanity" or "5G Apocalypse" or "Could 5G put more kids at risk for cancer?"
Let's just pause here, okay, because Russia doesn't follow ICNIRP's standards and recommendations for not the governance of non-ionizing radiation. They have their own. In fact, the Russian scientific body of evidence on non-ionizing radiation is extensive and goes back to the 60s and before. They had, with the Cold War going on, they had a large research body, but it was written in Russia, so it doesn't get a lot of pickup in the West. But nonetheless, the Russian Federation specifically advises that those under the age of 18 should not use a mobile phone at all and recommends low-emission phones. Requires the following: on-device labeling notifying users that all source of EMF, user guide information advising that it is a harmful source of EMF exposure, and the inclusion of courses in schools regarding mobile phone use and RF EMF exposure issues. I haven't been to Russia, so I can't 100% vouch for this information, but this is what I find. And that a large number of Russian scientists in the 60s and 70s pointed to the possibility of informational or non-thermal actions of EMF, radio frequency radiation, animal studies, experiments, and so on. Of course, it's not just Russia that's raising concerns about 5G. Brussels has a moratorium on 5G deployment due to Brussels having non-ICNIRP standards on radio frequency radiation levels. Swiss cantons blocking 5G. We've got Italy, Poland, Lithuania, and a number of other countries are also raising concerns as well. And here's another point. I don't think I've ever seen a single radio RT article on 5G. That's not where I get my information from. I get my information from the scientists, from scientific papers, and from industry experts. I attend conferences where the science and scientific information of the body of knowledge is presented. Okay, Monash University, Swinburne University, Telecom Paris Tech, a number of fully qualified field-specific scientists and medical professionals. That's where I get my information from. I go to the source of the information. So,
or 5G tech is crime under international law, and of course, totally insane, Telecom Industry ignores 5G dangers. And
I'm not sure that they ignore 5G dangers, but they can't insure against 5G dangers because insurance companies won't cover them, and they do periodically send out text messages warning you of the dangers, and the mobile phone manufacturers do include in the legalese information about how to reduce your radio frequency radiation exposure. They don't ignore it, but they are very concerned about it.
Where does RT get its data from? Certainly not from hard science.
I do get my information from hard science, and it's not what you're telling us, Dr. Karl.
Guardian reporter Tim Dowling wrote about RT that, and I quote, "fringe opinion takes centre stage." Reporting is routinely bolstered by testimony from experts you have never heard of, representing institutions you have never heard of, unquote. And here's a big surprise. While the official overseas Russian TV network claims there are massive health risks from the 5G network, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is a very big promoter of the 5G network. President Putin said, and I quote, "We need to look forward. The challenge for the upcoming years is to organise universal access to high-speed internet, to start operation of the 5th generation communication systems," unquote.
Yep, and they'll have to do that under quite strict Russian Federation guidelines and limits on radio frequency radiation, which probably explains why Russia can't deploy 5G right now, because they can't, because of their lower exposure limits.
Now, shifting to the folk who specialise in anti-technology, anti-sunscreen and anti-vaccine beliefs.
Okay, so it's anybody who doesn't believe the mainstream pushed propaganda.
You'll find that they also push this anti-5G agenda, but with a twist. They will sell you machines that will generate a supposedly good electromagnetic radiation that will protect you from the supposedly bad electromagnetic radiation, with prices ranging from $299 to $999.
Well, if I had $299 to $999, this is 5G protective technology. This is the type of technology that I would promote in terms of being able to actually quantify your exposure to radio frequency radiation. Go and buy yourself a meter. Know what you're exposed to and take steps to reduce your exposure.
And if this is not your bag of tea, they recommend, and I quote, spirulina, wheatgrass, vitamin C, and similar supplements which are...
Karl, this is not science. Whatever you're saying, this is not science. You provide no evidence to support your position here. And if you're including me with people that promote spirulina as a 5G protective mechanism, then I have a real problem with this.
Are consumable forms of sunlight which will always improve our health and raise our vibrations, unquote. Just what frequency they raise our vibrations to is not clear. Let's just hope it's in the non-ionising range.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is on ABC Radio National, that this tripe, this beat-up job on anybody who may have concerns about the health implications of radio frequency radiation, whether it's our existing exposure, the increased exposure due to the increased densification and rollout of mobile technology, 4G and 5G. Oh boy. So let's have a look. Where are we at? Dr. Karl spins a spider's web, doesn't he? So he's making the position statement that ionizing radiation is the only cause of cancer. Well, that's disproven. That's incorrect. He's saying that non-ionizing radiation cannot cause cancer because it's non-ionizing. That is false as well. We provided the evidence, we provided the scientific research that shows that that's incorrect. He seems to be suggesting that cancer is the only health effect of radiation. That's entirely false as well. We have a multiplicity of other health effects, whether it's autoimmune disease. That's one that I'm particularly concerned about. Neurological impacts, cardiac impacts. The list goes on. There are so many other potential health impacts of non-ionizing radiation, radio frequency radiation. It's not just cancer. He doesn't actually, if you notice, he doesn't actually talk about anything related to 5G itself, and I suspect that's because he has not got a clue. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He also has a bizarre standard of proof. He would require something where you could convict somebody. He would require court standard evidence before we take any control over radio frequency radiation. This is insane. Okay? We have strong evidence to suggest that radio frequency radiation has biological and health impacts. We should be taking a precautionary approach at this point. Because we are concerned there may be issues here, we shouldn't be rolling it out to the maximum of the bogus, arbitrary safety limits that are currently in place. We need to be dialing way back. We need to be controlling the rollout of this. Otherwise, we significantly risk getting into major population-wide health impacts. But he seems to be indicating that we can't do anything until we've got 100% conclusive proof that this stuff really does have the direct cause and effect that we think it does. Well, if you want that, who's testing 5G? We saw in Senate, in the US Senate, that industry certainly isn't doing 5G safety standard testing. So then we have the issue where we either have lack of proof, or do we have a lack of recognition of evidence? We have a lot of evidence, but we're not recognizing that in the formal sense, and therefore basing discussion on the body of evidence. Dr. Karl, you're cherry picking and you're producing a false narrative. As I say, Dr. Karl was never unbiased. And that's a problem, because Dr. Karl is a doctor and a scientist, and these are two of the most trustworthy professions in the public's perception. So Dr. Karl, with his pleasant, laconical persona, his quirky mannerisms, his engagement with children and engagement with the public, he's highly trustworthy, but he is putting out blatantly incorrect and factually incorrect statements on this subject. He's cherry picking, and yet he is one of the most trusted people. And it feeds into issues that we have where science is in crisis. We have 24-hour news cycles picking up fake news stories, and the BMJ is concerned about this as well. And all that Dr. Karl's doing here is feeding into this fake news narrative by cherry picking and not presenting a balanced perspective. Of course, it's not the first time that the ABC's got caught up in EMF related issues. Back in 2016, we had the Catalyst episode Why Fried. Dr. Marianne Desani putting out a half-hour episode on the dangers of non-ionising radiation. It went to the ABC's Independent Audience and Consumer Affairs Unit. They investigated complaints about the program and found that it breached the ABC's impartiality standards. Okay, so the ABC has impartiality standards by unduly favouring the unorthodox perspective that wireless devices and Wi-Fi pose significant health risks. They're then quoted for inaccuracies as well. The production team responded that the program team included a diverse range of views and remains confident that it covered the issues appropriately and in accordance with the editorial policies. They never accepted that they had done anything wrong. But nonetheless, Media Watch jumped on board and threw them under the bus. And eventually, Marianne Desani was sacked from the ABC at the end of 2016. That's a strong position when you have biased reporting that's breaching editorial standards in the field of non-ionising radiation. Dr. Karl, are you nervous yet? You should be. Okay? What needs to happen next? Complain to the ABC. That's what I'm going to be doing as soon as this video is uploaded, because this video is going to provide part of my evidence and my concerns as to what's going on. Complain to the ABC at abc.net.au/contact/complain.htm. Everybody watching this, go and complain. It was clearly not impartial and therefore breaches the ABC's impartiality standards. The ABC must retract these stories and reprimand Dr. Karl. Dr. Karl is unfit to present scientific content, and his contract with the ABC should be terminated immediately. Dr. Karl must apologise for deliberately misrepresenting the science regarding radio frequency EMF safety and health concerns. He must apologise for referring to concerned members of the public as hysterical. I object to that. I demand that Media Watch look at the biased reporting from Dr. Karl, and that Australian scientific journalists must hold their profession to a much higher standard to prevent the mistrust in science continuing to erode public trust. Where are the scientists in this? Where are the journalists? Where's the outrage in this despicable beat-up and this misrepresentation? That's it for me today. Thank you for your attention. Go and do something about it. Complain to the ABC. This cannot stand. We need to put a stop to this. Thank you very much.